Aviation and Patrol aircraft. As well, approximately 3,400 Canadian Armed Forces personnel across all branches of the service are authorized to deploy to the NATO response force if they are required. On March 8th, the Prime Minister announced that Canada will renew its commitment to Operation Reassurance.
I have to interrupt the honourable member for statements by members. The honourable member still has 3 minutes of her speech after oral questions and time for questions and comments. Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The honourable member for Brampton South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. April marks National Sikh Heritage Month in Canada. During this month, we learn about the rich history, culture, and religion of Sikhs in Canada and around the world. It is also time to celebrate the journey of Canadian Sikhs in building our diverse Canada with their everyday contribution. In April, the Sikh community celebrates Vaisakhi and Khalsa Day. This joyful day marks the start of a vibrant harvest season and signifies the founding of Khalsa Panth in 1699 by Guru Gobind Singh Ji, including his teachings of the oneness of humanity, equality, social justice, compassion, and seva, selfless service. These are the core values of Sikhs and the values that Canadians embrace. I also want to commend Sikh organizations helping those in need during the pandemic and by providing humanitarian aid to countries such as Haiti, Ukraine, and many others. On behalf of residents of Brampton South, I wish...
The honourable member for Essex.
Madam Speaker, Leanne and Sherry recently opened a respite program in my riding. It's called Life Day Respite Program Essex. The program is designed to enhance the development of adults 19 years and older. It provides daily life experiences that guide people to their best ability. Their aim is to assist families knowing their loved ones are safe and cared for. They focus on activities such as going to the library, grocery shopping, physical and mental growth, therapeutic skills, and social skills. Their program has open communication with each member and their supportive individuals. This being World Autism Month, please join me in celebrating Leanne and Sherry and thanking them for such an important service to our community. Congratulations, Life Day Respite Program in Essex, and thank you for helping to leave the world a better place.
The honourable member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to recognize the important work that the Port Coquitlam Heritage Society has done in documenting and uncovering our shared Canadian history. Thanks to funds received through the Canada Summer Jobs Program, the POCO Heritage Society was able to catalog and digitize its collection of well over 2,000 objects, including Second World War uniforms and antique traditional Chinese medicine bottles from the 1880s. Through the diligent work of their staff and volunteers, including grade 10 student Queenie Lee, they translated the Mandarin inscriptions into English. They learned more about the lives of the thousands of Chinese workers who came to Canada searching for opportunities and a better life. The railway would not have been built without their significant contributions, and BC would not be part of Canada. Thank you to all the staff and volunteers of the Port Coquitlam Heritage Society. Your work ties us to our shared past and allows us to reflect and build upon the work of those who came before us to create a better future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, on April 3rd, the Patriots of the University of Quebec at Trois-Rivières won the youth sport championship in men's hockey for the 5th time. However, they had to face real adversity to get there. They had a cancelled season, classes, training, and socialization on Zoom, a shortened season, a pandemic break, and departures. We heard them chanting, "We want to play." Nothing more could stop these student athletes. United like never before, they moved on with determination with a perfect playoffs record. And in the finals, they had to be resilient one last time. They were behind by 2 goals, but ultimately won in overtime thanks to Alexis Gravel's 66 blocks and Simon Lafrance's winning goal. And let's not forget Chief coaches Marc-Étienne Hubert's kissing the blade of the hockey stick for good luck before the winning goal. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to congratulate the Patriots. Go Pats, go. The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, yesterday for a 6th consecutive year, I had the honor of swearing in Classroom 321's cabinet at the Jean Nicolet Primary School in the riding of Bourassa. That cabinet has existed since 2009 in order to raise 11 and 12-year-olds' awareness of good governance and democratic life. And I gave a certificate of merit with parents present to all members of the cabinet, who were Zachary Messia, Prime Minister Leland Chapman, Minister of the Environment, Laetitia Georges Désir, Deputy Prime Minister, Anne-Clara François, Minister of Communications and Information, Colonel William Byram Lelièvre, Minister of the Public Service, Ahmed Nabat, Minister of Justice, and Woody Manuel Phileus, Minister of Sports and Leisure. I'd like to congratulate them. And I'd also like to thank teacher Caroline François and all of the teachers and staff at the school. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Tobique-Mactaquac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadian farmers and producers grow our food and literally keep our land. My riding of Tobique-Mactaquac is home to a wide variety of producers. A strong agricultural sector is so vital to our country and her future. Organizations like 4-H play an important role in training up the next generation of farmers and responsible citizens.
Hear, hear.
Through programs like public speaking, animal care, and farm experience, 4-H provides a valuable service and many amazing opportunities for their participants. The 4-H community in Western New Brunswick has suffered the devastating loss of 2 of their members over the past couple of years. Evan Graham and Cole Hunter. These 2 outstanding young men were very involved with 4-H. I know their loss still weighs heavily on their families and our region. Next week at the 69th Annual Carleton County Spring Show and Sale in Florenceville, Bristol, I look forward to seeing all the participants and volunteers. And Mr. Speaker, I have a feeling that there will be a couple of smiling faces watching over it all. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Mr. Speaker, April is Sikh Heritage Month. The Sikh community continues to enrich and strengthen Canada since the first Gurdwara opened its doors more than 100 years ago in British Columbia. I'd like to wish the Sikh community in my riding a very happy Sikh Heritage Month. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to extend my well wishes to the Muslim community in Cloverdale, Langley City. Saturday was the beginning of Ramadan, celebrated by thousands in the riding of Cloverdale, Langley City. Muslims of all different backgrounds will come together for iftars and congregational prayers in person for the first time in 2 years. Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to call on Premier Ford to reinstate funding for the Confederation GO Station in my riding of Hamilton East, Stony Creek. Not less than a year into his mandate, Premier Ford and his government cut the $150 million planned investment for the Stony Creek Station. What was supposed to be a bustling GO station is today nothing more than a glorified bus stop and surface parking lot. Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House knows the benefits that come with interregional transit investments. It helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions by taking thousands of vehicles off our congested highways. It spurs residential and commercial investments, creating new jobs and new tax revenues for municipalities and other levels of government. It facilitates sustainable growth by encouraging development in our established urban boundaries. Eerily similar to the investment strategy adopted by the former Harper government, Premier Ford has created a system of the haves and the have-nots. It's time for Ontario's Premier to realize the importance of the Confederation GO Station and reinstate the investment he and his government cut in 2019.
The Honourable Member for Mission Masquew, Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, Vancouver Rogues are Canada's first gay and inclusive rugby club, originally active from 2001 to 2009. The club has been revived for the 2021-2022 BC Rugby Union season, sponsored by the Mariloma Rugby Club. The Rogues plan on being a permanent team with a mission to support underrepresented communities in sport and fight homophobic and transphobic behaviors both in sport and society. Last weekend's 52-10 win against Abbotsford Rugby Football Club is the Rogues' first victory of the season and first win ever in club history. As a member of the opposing team, a huge congratulations to the Rogues on their victory. This August, the Rogues will represent BC at the Bingham Cup in Ottawa, the largest biannual amateur rugby tournament in the world. It brings together over 2,500 like-minded players from 60 countries to celebrate diversity and inclusivity and to show the world that rugby truly is a sport for everyone. So I look forward to seeing the Rogues kick and drop goals, rucking hard, and tackling barriers in the years to come. Thank you, Mr.
Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Vimy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pleasure that I will rise to talk about the Autism Month, which just started. Yesterday in my riding of Vimy, I was pleased to participate in an event with people dedicated to this cause. I'd like to thank Laval's Autism Society for all their hard work. As an ambassador of Autism Month, I would like to raise awareness about autism. The conference organized at the Autism Center highlighted critical facilities for care and support to this community. I would like to strongly encourage this model, which could become a reference throughout municipalities in the country.
With autism is an individual, and people with autism have a lot to offer and teach us. They see the world from a different perspective, and this brings many strengths that make the world a better place. Merci, thank you.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, 2 athletes from my riding shone at the Olympic Games in Beijing this winter, Elliot Grondin from Sainte-Marie and Marie-Philippe Poulin from Beauceville. After going to Pyeongchang in 2018 at the age of 16, Elliot has since refined his talent in snowboard cross, and he literally flew above the competition and reached the podium twice with a big smile. He was already an inspiration for youth in Beauce, and now he has become a legend. What about Marie-Philippe? She is the captain clutch of the Canadian women's hockey team. Not only was she a flag bearer, but she brought her team to victory with a gold medal. And now that the Olympics have barely ended, she's already thinking about Italy in 2026. When you have been crowned best women's hockey player in the world and you have 4 Olympic medals, along with many others, and you're still thinking of the future, well, that's an example of determination. I'd like to also say that I'm thinking about your respective families and all of their sacrifices through the years to help you shine. Marie-Philippe and Elliot, Beauce is so proud of you. Thank you.
Calgary Shepherd.
The federal vaccine mandates are hurting real people. In my riding, an aspiring young astronomer, Chloe, can't go to the NASA space camp. She's not vaccinated, but the camp has no vaccine requirement. Another is Patrick, who followed public advice and got the very first vaccine available in Kazakhstan, the Russian Sputnik vaccine. He's confirmed he has antibodies, and the best medical advice he's obtained is not to get another 2 rounds of the Pfizer vaccine. Now he can't return to Kazakhstan to get back to work. And several constituents have come to me with heartbreaking stories of being unable to fly to funerals for family members in Canada. Some were forced to drive thousands of kilometers in order to attend this end-of-life celebration. Conservatives have been asking the NDP Liberals for a plan on when these unjust federal mandates will end. They voted against it. We've asked for the data used to justify these measures. The Transport Minister hasn't provided it. The Health Minister promised to give us the documents he based his decisions on. We're still waiting for them. All the provinces have either ended the mandates or given public the path to end these restrictions. End the confusion, hurt, and frustration. The answer is easy. End these punitive federal vaccine mandates.
The Honourable Member for Yukon.
Vibrant, engaged, diverse, and growing. Did you know that Yukon has the 3rd biggest per capita proportion of Francophones in Canada? The Francophone Renaissance in Yukon started in the 70s, after the Official Languages Act was passed. Thanks to federal participation in supporting the Francophone community in Yukon, the community has since grown a great deal, and soon there will be a bilingual health center in the territory, as well as a 3rd primary French language school in Dawson City, opening shortly. And in addition, French immersion schools are seeing an increasing support. You can hear French throughout Yukon, and as a Francophile, I'm very proud to see the progress that has occurred. With C13, we can go even farther. We can support our minority language communities.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, today I want to highlight the amazing work of an organization in my riding. Rise Together was started in January 2021 by Holly Smith and Trishna Gill. They are best friends and students at Oak Bay High, and they help connect our community to support local organizations doing vital work. Rise Together partners with local businesses to place donation jars at storefronts, creating an easy and accessible way for community members to donate. Each month, they bring attention to a new local initiative in need of support. Past organizations featured include the Rainbow Kitchen Society, One Up Single Parent Resource Center, and the Victoria Women's Transition House. They also bring the community together for charitable events. And Rise Together's most recent collaboration is an art exhibit and silent auction in support of Ukraine. It's at Fortune Gallery from May 11th to May 13th, and 100% of the proceeds will be donated to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. Thank you, Holly and Trishna, for exemplifying the drive, passion, and contributions of today's youth.
I do want to remind everyone that there's some great statements by members going on right now, and I'm going to keep the tone down a little bit so we can get through these. L'honorable député de Shefford.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is April 5th, and we should remember the work that is done behind the scenes in our families. The hard work of carers and volunteers. It's what's known as invisible labor, which disproportionately affects women. For 22 years, the FAS organization has been leading the fight to take a day to reflect on what our society would be like without this invisible labor, without all those hours spent taking care of others, with too little gratitude in return. Collectively, we are invited to consider better ways to create measures to ensure that this invisible labor is better shared. The pandemic has exacerbated problems linked to the invisible labor, and the health situation is not yet resolved. Women are still the ones doing the greater part of this work. And so, we should officially name the second Tuesday of April as National Invisible Labor Day, because invisible labor counts. Thank you.
Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, with the first NDP Liberal budget in history coming in a few days, it is important to take stock of the world the millennial generation is inheriting, where half of us will never be able to buy a home despite Canada being the second largest landmass on Earth. Plenty of land to build houses. Why is it getting less and less affordable to do so? Where $300 might buy you 4 small bags of groceries, despite Canada having an abundance of arable farmland perfect for growing food, why is it getting more and more expensive? Where $100 barely fills the tank of a small car, despite Canada having some of the largest carbon energy reserves in the world. Gas and transportation should be cheap, and yet it's never been more costly. This is the everyday life Canadian millennials are inheriting after 6 years of Liberal governance and their inflationary policies. Canadians cannot afford any more of this, Mr. Speaker, and certainly cannot afford the upcoming Liberal NDP budget.
That's right. The Honourable Member for Mississauga-Malton.
Mr. Speaker, many people have made the trek from the villages of Punjab to Canada to build a life. Baldev Singh Sidhu went back to Punjab so that he could build the lives of others. With a passion for fighting, he started a boxing academy in his native village of Chukkar. One day, a young boy, a village-born child, showed up at his door wanting to fight, to prove himself after being at odds with a fighter from the academy. Mr. Sidhu saw something in that boy, trained him, and eventually adopted him as his own. Today, that boy stands in our midst, now a grown man and a champion. Sukhdeep Singh Chakriya, whose last name bears witness to the village from where he hails, reigns 10-0 as the Canadian middleweight champion.
Oral question. Question orale. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Thursday is fast approaching. approaching, and with it we will see our first ever NDP Liberal budget, a budget that promises a hard veer to the left with big spending and fiscal irresponsibility. Gone are the days when these Liberals followed the advice of their moderate colleagues like John Manley and Anne McClellan. Instead, their inspiration for the budget will come from the fringes of the NDP movement. Isn't it true that this budget will ignore the need to address inflation and the cost of living and instead give in to the extreme demands of the NDP?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, 2 years ago, our government put in place an economic response plan to meet the unprecedented challenge of COVID-19. We positioned our economy to come roaring back faster and recover stronger. As of February 2022, we've recovered 112% of the jobs lost at the peak of the pandemic, and we must continue now to focus on our work to create jobs and continue building a Canada where nobody gets left behind. I look forward to the tabling of the Budget 2022 and presenting our plan for moving forward for all Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, the fact is, out-of-control spending leads to out-of-control prices. Over the last 6 years, and with increasingly irresponsible budgets this government delivers, the more Canadians are suffering and being left behind. Right. Canadians are much worse off today than they were 6 years ago. They can't afford a house, gas, or groceries. This continued irresponsible and out-of-control spending will result in more and more Canadians unable to pay their bills. Still, the Prime Minister is doing it. Why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, over the past 6 years, we saw the economy grow. We saw hundreds of thousands of Canadians, including kids, lifted out of poverty. We've seen investments that demonstrate that every step of the way, including through this pandemic, we had people's backs. We entered this pandemic with a strong fiscal position, and we're using that fiscal firepower to support Canadians through and beyond COVID-19. Our choice, contrary to Conservatives, was to make sure families didn't have to choose between putting food on the table, keeping a roof over their head. We will always have Canadians' backs. We will always do it responsibly in a fiscal way.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, the fact is this Prime Minister continues to wedge, divide, and stigmatize Canadians. On this side of the House, we believe the greatest thing we can do to unify Canadians is make their life more affordable. We believe we should empower people so they can buy a home, fill their gas tank, and put food on their table. Will the Prime Minister admit that with every budget he delivers, Canadians have become worse off? Will he listen not just to Conservatives, but to moderate Liberals in his own party, say no to the NDP extreme demands, and deliver a responsible budget?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians are grateful we don't listen to Conservatives on matter of supporting Canadians. The first thing we did was lower taxes for the middle class or raise them for the wealthiest 1%. Conservatives were opposed. We increased the Canada Child Benefit to match the cost of living. Conservatives were opposed. We moved forward with $10 a day childcare for families across the country. Federal Conservatives opposed. We boosted the GIS for vulnerable seniors, more support to students, investments in affordable housing. The Conservatives oppose each one. Mr. Speaker, we will be there for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, we are a mere 2 days away from the first NDP budget supported by the most left-wing Liberal finance minister the Liberals have ever seen. I simply cannot believe that native Liberal MPs are happy to see this shift to fiscal irresponsibility. These big spending budgets inevitably lead to inflation, higher interest costs, and less money in people's pockets. Is it fair to say that the Minister for Finance has already chosen her side, the NDP, and its astronomical spending at the expense of Canadians who are finding it ever harder to pay their bills, Mr. Speaker? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as government, we have always been there for Canadians and we will continue to be there for Canadians. Throughout the pandemic, we have made investments to ensure that Canadian families do not have to indebt themselves so that families can continue to feed their families. And we will continue to be there for them. And it is thanks to our investments that the Canadian economy has boomed with unprecedented jobs growth over the past few months. We will continue to be there in a responsible way, and I can reassure everyone that all the diversity of Liberal MPs will support this budget. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Oh, let's speak about it, Mr. Speaker. I know that this Prime Minister systematically refuses to listen to the Conservatives who are calling for greater fiscal discipline. So, for the good of Canada, maybe he will listen to the advice that comes from his own party. Former Finance Minister Paul Martin used to say, and I quote, "It's when the economy is growing that you have to reduce the deficit, so we must act now." The economy has generated huge revenues for the government because of inflation. Will the Prime Minister continue to take this money out from the pockets of Canadians, or will he continue to spend lavishly as he has done since 2015? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Contrary to the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, we have committed ourselves to always being here for Canadians, and we understand that rising cost of living and pressures are real, and that is the reason for which we continue to be there to support them with investments in housing, with help for seniors, with help for workers. Conservatives, however, want to go back to austerity that will harm Canadians. We, on our side, will continue to invest in a responsible way, in a prudent way, and we will continue to be here for Canadians because that is what Canadians need right now. The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No one believes in the greenhouse gas emission reduction plan from the Liberal government. Everyone has doubts about this plan. The minister has tried. I honestly believe that the minister tried, but the government has tried to erect obstacles. The IPCC has said that it's impossible to meet objectives by increasing production. Can the Prime Minister admit that his plan is failed? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have implemented a responsible plan, one of the most ambitious. The Bloc should understand the importance of working with Quebecers in order to create new economic opportunities and sustainable jobs. That is the reason for which we are encouraging our Bloc colleagues to speak, for example, to Mayor Bruno Marchand in Quebec City, with Valérie Plante in Montreal, and the Union of Quebec Municipalities that have all commended our plan. Our priority is to work with Quebecers, not creating issues, so that we can offer them a healthy economy and a healthy air to breathe. The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, I don't have to commend his plan. I'm not asking him. Mr. Speaker, the plan is scientifically unacceptable. The government isn't even trying to meet its objectives in the first place. The proof? They're subsidising oil and gas. They're increasing production. Can he at least commit to refusing the Baie du Nord project once and for all? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we often highlight that the Bloc Québécois is looking for issues, but to insult the very integrity of the Mayor of Montreal, the Mayor of Quebec City, people who are honest in their desire to have a cleaner environment, a cleaner and more prosperous future for their people and for our country, we are here to work in partnership, hand in hand with all Quebecers, even with the Bloc Québécois, on issues that are important for Quebecers and Canadians as a whole, and that will continue. We will continue to be a constructive government and an ambitious and bold government for climate change and to help commit Canadians throughout the country.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of everything is going up. Canadians are hurting. They're having a hard time putting food on the table, finding a home they can afford. That's why we want, in this budget, clear steps, clear actions taken to make sure Canadians get the help they need in this difficult time. So, will the government commit to making sure people can have support so they can find a home to call their own? Will they commit to movement on dental care starting with children under 12? Will the government commit to these priorities in this budget?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 6 years, we've been there to support Canadians, to support families, to support elders, to support students. During these 2 years of the pandemic, we made it an explicit promise to have Canadians' backs. And we did that not just because it's a value we believe in, that to support Canadians, but also because we know it's the best way to ensure that our economy comes roaring back, that we have small businesses flourishing, that we have job creation, that we have prosperity created and shared across this country. That's why we're investing to support Canadians. That's why we're investing to grow the economy. That's why we're continuing to have Canadians' backs.
The honourable member for Burnaby South. People are going through a difficult time. The pandemic is hitting hard. The cost of living is rising. While people are suffering, big business and the ultra-rich are making record profits. Is the government ready to make the ultra-rich pay their fair share, starting with the big banks, to invest in programs, in social programs to help families in these difficult times? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the very beginning of the pandemic, we have promised to continue to be there for Canadians and to support them with everything that is necessary for as long as necessary. And not only has this allowed Canadians to be supported during the pandemic, at the same time, it has ensured a stronger economic recovery as compared to other countries. And we will continue to be there to invest and to make sure that vulnerable people have the necessary support whilst creating growth, economic growth, whilst creating jobs, whilst making sure that we have a good family a good life for families.
Well, Canadians are trying to balance their budgets. They're trying to feed their families. They're trying to put a roof over their heads. Yet every step, this Prime Minister has abandoned them, as the skyrocketing cost of living leaves millions of Canadians behind. This is the Prime Minister who promised to help the middle class and those wanting to join it. Remember that? Yet under this left-leaning NDP Liberal government, that dream is now dead for millions of Canadians. Will the upcoming budget finally include help for Canadians who are no longer part of the middle class?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, while the other side continues to undersell what Canadians have accomplished, there is genuine good news to share across the land. Our GDP grew for 8 consecutive months. We've recovered 3.4 million jobs lost to the pandemic. We have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian economy is resilient. Canadians are resilient. The economy is getting back on track. The other side might not like economic growth, Mr. Speaker, but the government certainly does, and so do Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, as the NDP Liberal government lurches further to the left, millions of Canadians have been left behind. The skyrocketing cost of living means families can't pay for groceries or gas to get their kids to school. The housing affordability crisis means countless Canadians have lost their dream of home ownership. It was this Prime Minister who promised to stand up for the middle class. "I've got your back," he said. Instead, millions of Canadians are falling behind and out of the middle class. Will the Prime Minister's upcoming budget help those who have been left behind by this affordability crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, in contrast to what the member opposite said, it was actually this government that helped millions of Canadians. In fact, when we brought in the Canada Child Benefit that helped 9 out of 10 Canadian families who have seen hundreds or thousands of dollars each year to support putting food on the tables. That's real money for real Canadians, Mr. Speaker, and they know that this government, whether it was before the pandemic, during the pandemic, or after we recover, will be there for them every single step of the way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, too many millennials make good money but are stuck in their parents' basements. They lose all hope when they see home prices up 36% in Toronto. A committee, a GTA Liberal Member of Parliament, said Canada has a healthy housing market. Yet witness after witness said the opposite. The Minister of Housing has access to the best housing information in the country. Does the minister disagree with his colleague that Canada has a healthy housing market, or will he too plant his head in the sand?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker,
I wish the member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola, had a conversation on housing and a united approach with his colleagues from Calgary Centre, Mission Matskui, Fraser Canyon, as well as Simcoe North. They've all trashed the National Housing Strategy. They said that we should pull back from measures to help first-time homebuyers. They're against housing supply. They're against housing affordability investments. Get your story straight, Mr. Member of Parliament.
We did so well right up to there. The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
I don't think he meant you, Mr. Speaker, but the only thing dropping in this housing market is the Liberals' credibility on affordability. Now, at committee, Statistics Canada said we haven't seen gains this large in 30 years. The price increases are broad-based, with the biggest drivers being gasoline, food, supply chains, and a heated housing market. Will the minister admit to his failures, or will he continue to blame Conservatives for his mistakes?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, it's really difficult to take Conservatives seriously on the issue of housing affordability because they say one thing in this August chamber and then outside in committee...
Order. I don't know who that was. We just should be able to hear what's going on in the House. Are we ready to move on? I think I'd like to hear the minister. So, the Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's really difficult for them to hear the inconsistencies on housing affordability. That's why you're hearing a lot of noise on the other side. But let me set the record straight, Mr. Speaker, on first-time homebuyers, on housing affordability, on making sure that Canadians have access to their dream of home ownership. They're nowhere to be found. They say one thing in this August chamber, but when they're in committee, they talk down the National Housing Strategy. They talk down the first-time homebuyer incentive. They talk down the Rapid Housing Initiative, Mr. Speaker. They have absolutely no credibility, and Canadians know that.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, all young families in Canada would love to have a house. Unfortunately, because this government is doing absolutely nothing to jugulate inflation, these families do not have access to property. The cost of housing is going up by more than 30% every year in Canada. This is unacceptable. Since the beginning of question period, the government keeps boasting that, oh, our plan is working apparently, but the issue is that it is not. Why does this plan apparently work when it's clearly not working at all? The Honourable Minister for Housing. Every Canadian.
Listen to me. Perhaps they will listen to the former Conservative Minister and current Mayor of London, Ed Holder, who, with regard to our investments through the Rapid Housing Initiative, said this, quote, "This funding will save lives and ultimately improve the lives of those who come to occupy these desperately needed homes." And so we are exceptionally grateful that our commitment to this vital work is shared with equal enthusiasm by the Government of Canada. So, the Conservatives voted against that, Mr. Speaker, so they voted against every other affordable housing measure that we introduced.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the Minister for his sentence in French, which is great, but I would like to remind him of the truth of the matter. The reality is that housing costs are going up by 30% as we speak. This has led to this 5.7% interest, which means that food is more expensive, gas is more expensive, and so taxes are higher. In effect, for Canadians last week, the government had the opportunity to not increase the carbon tax, but the federal tax went up on Friday once again. Can the government commit to at least stop increasing taxes in the next budget in 2 days? The Honourable Minister for Tourism. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the economy and the good news that this means for Canadians. 8 consecutive months of growth. A 6.7% GDP increase, the biggest trade surplus since 2008. $6.6 billion this autumn. S&P and Moody's confirmed our AAA rating. That is leadership. That is affordability. On the other side, they don't like the economy, but here we do. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Greenpeace, Équiterre, the David Suzuki Foundation and the Sierra Club are all unanimous. The Baie du Nord oil project is a no. Yesterday's IPCC report concluded the same thing. I quote UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who says, the real dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing fossil fuel production. Mr. Speaker, he perfectly describes what the minister would do with Baie du Nord, increase oil production by 1 billion barrels. Will the minister say no to Baie du Nord? The Honourable Minister for the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question and her work. We recognise the importance of the decision with regards to developing Baie du Nord. We follow a process that is based on the best scientific evidence available. That's why we've extended the deadline so that we can truly examine the complex information we have received so we can make a good decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Avignon-la-Métis-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's credibility is at stake. He cannot table a plan to reduce greenhouse gases and then a week later even think about approving a billion-barrel oil project. That would negate all of his efforts, and it would make him just another environment minister in a Canada that has tabled 11 plans since 1988 and has never even come close to meeting its targets. Mr. Speaker, the Baie du Nord decision is the minister's first big test. In the name of the plan that he himself has just tabled, will he say no to Baie du Nord? The Honourable Minister for the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank as well my colleague for her question. I would like to quote what people have had to say about our plan. Cadrivio from Équiterre. We want to say finally, because it's the first time that we have a very detailed strategy, such a detailed strategy to reach our objectives. I'd like to remind my colleague that our plan is based on scientific data, and that our plan clearly shows, black on white, how we will tackle pollution and meet our objectives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm hearing some dissent from the other side. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. For many people, it is not clear how you can reduce emissions from the oil sector whilst approving the extraction of 1.1 billion more barrels of oil from Baie du Nord. To many people, Mr. Speaker, this seems highly logical. Not for everyone, I can hear. This brings us back to the United Nations yesterday. On the sidelines of the IPCC report, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said this, and I quote, "Some governments say one thing, but then they do another thing." And he added, to put it simply, they are lying. Mr. Speaker, these are harsh words, but necessary words. Will the minister say no to Baie du Nord? The Honourable Minister for the Environment. My colleague is right. There are people who agree with the Conservatives when it comes to climate change, and there are some, like us, who are acting, putting a price on pollution, which is already one of the highest in the world. We are on the path to reducing our greenhouse gas, our methane emissions by 2025 by 40 to 60%. We have a 75% reduction, which is one of the most ambitious plans in the world. The federal government wants to tackle pollution production, and my colleague knows it very well. It's a provincial jurisdiction at the end of the day.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Crushing, stunning, frenzy. That's what the Royal Bank is calling the housing crisis in Canada. The Bank of Montreal is calling it a full-scale attack. Housing experts are calling the minister's programs absolute failures. When will this minister listen to the experts and stop blaming others for his programs? Failures.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would urge the Honourable Member to look at what the National Housing Strategy is doing in his home province of Alberta. In Alberta, we're investing $444 million to support 35,000 households to pay the rent. What does he have to say about that? And not only that, he should have a conversation with his colleagues from various parts of the country who continue to talk down federal investments in housing through the National Housing Strategy and have dismissed efforts that we're making to enable more Canadians to have access to home ownership. They want us to pull back from the National Housing Strategy, and they want no federal leadership in this space.
We'll just take a second here to compose. All right. The Honourable Member for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister has to keep reusing the same recycled talking points, twisting people's words because he's embarrassed, and rightfully so, of his record as minister. He claims to have a plan that would help make housing more affordable. But under his watch, we've seen housing prices double, rent more affordable than ever before. And Mr. Speaker, more and more people are looking at the situation and saying they're giving up on ever buying a home. Right. He should finally admit that his plan for the first-time home buyers isn't working and it's only actually driving prices up. The question is, will the minister actually acknowledge his record of failure, change course, and actually make housing more affordable for Canadians and not just using the same talking points?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I wish the Honourable Member would look at the federal housing investments through just one program in the National Housing Strategy in his home province of Ontario. Through the Canada Housing Benefit, we're investing $1.46 billion to support over 50,000 households to pay the rent. That is a record.
Order! It's the fourth time I have to stand to get the minister's answers so that I can hear what he's saying. So I'm going to say to the minister, will you please answer? You have the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I guess the record of supporting 50,000 households to pay their rent through an investment of $1.46 billion is making the other side heckle. Let me tell you what the Honourable Member who asked the question said about the National Housing Strategy. He said we should pull back from federal leadership and investments in affordable housing. You know what he said about first-time homebuyer incentive, a program to enable more young people to access their dream of ownership? He said we should get out of the business of helping Canadians buy their own home. Shame, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
You know what, Mr. Speaker? We really don't appreciate the tone, the arrogant tone coming from that housing minister day after day, especially after 6 years of their government. Housing prices have effectively doubled. Half of my generation will never be able to afford a home as a result of their failed policies. A little humility would be welcome from that Minister of Housing. When will this government abandon their failed housing strategy, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, this is what the Mayor of Winnipeg, Brian Bowman, said about the Rapid Housing Initiative. He said, this program has been a huge success for Winnipeg. And I would actually invite the other side to look at their record. They voted against the first-time homebuyer incentive. They voted against the Rapid Housing Initiative. They voted against the Canada Housing Benefit. They voted against every single program that we've brought to this House. So they failed in government when it comes to housing, and they're now failing in opposition, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week's budget will prove to be a pivotal point for the lives of financially struggling seniors. They need relief from the record inflation, the record increase in the price of gas, the record increase in the price of food, and the record increase in the price of medication that this government has overseen. Mr. Speaker, will this government commit to measures lowering the cost of living to help all seniors in my riding and Canadians in this week's budget?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, excuse me if I won't take any lessons from a party whose plan was to prolong the age of retirement, Mr. Speaker, to 67. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, one of the very very first things we did, we actually restored that, Mr. Speaker. We enhanced the CPP. We increased the GIS that has helped over 900,000 single seniors, Mr. Speaker. We provided direct payments to seniors during the pandemic. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we're making high-speed internet more affordable for seniors, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we're going to continue to ensure we support seniors now and into the future.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
In Nunavut, people are feeling the impacts of housing crisis every day. We need 3,000 more housing units so that people are not living in overcrowded housing that is in desperate need of repair. The government has only committed to build 100 units. The Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy shows a current housing gap requiring $22.7 billion for First Nations. Will the government deliver the affordable housing Indigenous people need?
The Honourable Minister of Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question. I agree. In all my travels, virtual and real, housing has been the #1 issue that comes up time and again. That's why we've signed 10-year housing agreements with all 3 national Indigenous organizations, Métis National Council, as well as ITK and Inuit rights holders. We've invested $513 million for infrastructure, which includes housing last August. And Mr. Speaker, we know this is a priority. We're going to get it done.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this week marks 2 years since 16-year-old Aisha Hudson was killed by a Winnipeg police officer. Aisha's family is mourning and waiting for answers, like thousands of families across this country who have lost loved ones to this ongoing genocide against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. The Liberals must act now. Will the minister commit that the budget will include immediate, targeted, and adequate funding to implement the 231 calls for justice?
The Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is right. We're failing as a society as long as every woman, child, and LGBTQ person is not safe in this country. The investments that we put in through prior budgets, whether it's the $2 billion that we invested in the earlier budget, in Budget 2021, are designed specifically to address this ongoing tragedy. Just last week, I had the honor and pleasure of announcing investments that respond directly to Call to Justice 2.3 and providing safe cultural spaces for Indigenous communities across the country. That has to continue. It has to continue on a systematic basis until everyone's safe in this country. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charlottetown.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian veterans have served our country with courage and sacrifice. They deserve our respect, our support, and our gratitude. Accessing mental health services is absolutely vital to the well-being of many veterans. Could the Minister please update the House on our recent $140 million investment to ensure that veterans get the treatment they need and deserve as quickly as possible? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Charlottetown for his question and also for his work on behalf of veterans and Veterans Affairs. Last week, we launched our new $140 million mental health benefit, which will make sure veterans get coverage for mental health treatments as soon as possible. This is a significant step, and I can assure my honourable colleagues that we will continue to supply the support and services that our veterans need and deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.
The Honourable Member for Charlevoix-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised not to buy the F-35s, even though he knew that the Canadian industry had invested hundreds of millions to respect their commitments to Lockheed Martin. Since then, Quebec and Canadian companies have been living in limbo, and they've been kept in limbo with last week's announcement. He committed to having a dialogue, not to picking the F-35s. How many billions more will be wasted before the government decides to purchase the F-35s, and when will we get the first jet? The Honourable Minister of Public Procurement.
And let me be clear, we have made a decision to do this in the responsible way. We are moving forward with the purchase of 88 fighter jets, and we're doing that with an open, fair, and transparent process. This is a significant investment, and this is what Canadians expect of us. We have a rigorous process that's going to deliver the best plane for the best price with the greatest economic benefit to Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Charlevoix-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that this is from a few months ago, but I have another question, because when it comes to military spending, we have to ensure that the NDP leader would agree. He's already said he's opposed to increase in defense spending with regard to Canada's commitment under NATO, while the Liberals said that they would do the opposite. But the new confidence and supply agreement with the NDP, the third opposition party, guarantees support for the Liberal minority government in exchange for new investments elsewhere, an agreement that would ensure that it's the tail that wags the dog. Will the Prime Minister demand the NDP leader to make his troops vote in favor of the defense budget increase? The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for the question.
Our commitment to the Canadian Armed Forces. Let's be clear. The Conservatives, for a decade, had the chance to step up and invest in NATO and our armed forces. Instead, they decided to actively step back and allow military spending to drop below 1% of our GDP in 2013. Not us, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to invest in our armed forces. We will continue to support NATO and NORAD and our Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, this government has been ill-prepared and found wanting too many times on the national security front. They have embarrassed Canadians by their response to Ukraine and by the state of the Canadian forces. The NATO spending goal is 2% of GDP. We're at 1.38% and number 25 overall. Will the Defence Minister commit here and now to increase defence spending in this budget by buying F-35s and moving forward with NORAD modernization?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I find it unfortunate that the member opposite is characterizing the views of our Canadian Armed Forces as being ashamed. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, the top of my mandate letter is making sure that the Canadian Armed Forces have the equipment that they need to defend our country. I am focused on delivering results for the Canadian Armed Forces. We are increasing defense spending by 70% over the 9-year period beginning in 2017, including NORAD modernization and including our commitments to NATO. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, when Conservatives were in government, we bought Leopard 2 main battle tanks, C-17s, C-130Js, Chinook helicopters, and LAV armored fighting vehicles. After 6.5 years in power, almost $2 billion wasted on obsolete F-18s and upgrades, Canadians and the CAF need certainty, and our national sovereignty must be defended.
Hear, hear.
How many more billions will the NDP Liberals waste before Canada gets F-35s and announces the contract date and the delivery schedule?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say that unlike the Conservatives who cut billions from defence, we are providing our Canadian Armed Force members with the equipment that they need to keep Canadians safe. This means we're moving to finalize contracts for 88 new fighter jets. This means we're delivering the first Canadian-built ship in 20 years. This means that we are delivering 6 Arctic offshore patrol vessels, 2 of which have been built and in their water, 1 of which has circumnavigated the North American continent, and we are continuing to deliver for the Canadian Armed Forces. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because they're a priority for our country, and we will continue to ensure that they are well-resourced and well-equipped. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, seniors are worried. They saw clearly that they were absent from the Liberal-NDP pact. That's why today FDOC repeated its priorities in light of Thursday's upcoming budget. It's asking for increased OAS for everyone aged 65 and up, a tax credit for seniors who continue to work, that the natural caregiver credit be refundable, and finally, a permanent and unconditional increase in healthcare funding. In Thursday's budget, will seniors' needs be met or will they be ignored like in the NDP Liberal Pact? The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
From the very beginning, our government has been there to support seniors, especially those most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, one of the very first things that we did as a government was actually restore the age of eligibility for OAS and GIS to 65, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we enhanced the GIS for the most vulnerable seniors. That has actually helped 900,000 single seniors, Mr. Speaker. We, of course, Mr. Speaker, are moving forward this year by increasing the OAS by 10% for those 75 and over. Mr. Speaker, we're also making high-speed internet more affordable for the most vulnerable seniors. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're going to make sure we continue to deliver for seniors. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, the seniors have been the first to suffer from inflation, especially those 75 and under, because the federal government has abandoned them. The cost of living has exploded, but old age security has not gone up. Cost of groceries and rent are breaking records. The feds have nothing better to propose to those under 74 years of age except to go back to work as if they were lazy. Mr. Speaker, it's embarrassing. We encourage seniors to work when it's their choice to do so, but not to make up for them being abandoned by the federal government. When will the government increase the pension for 75 and under? The Honourable Minister of Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, since 2015, we've been working extremely hard to support seniors. Mr. Speaker, ensuring a safe and secure retirement is a priority for this government. We've restored the OAS and GIS from 67 to 65. We have enhanced the CPP and Quebec, followed by QPP. We have raised the GIS, Mr. Speaker, for 900,000 single seniors. We're investing billions into home care. We're investing billions into, of course, Connecting Families initiative, Mr. Speaker. 7,000 new affordable housing units for Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we're going to continue to deliver for them.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Last week I met with former Afghan interpreters on the Hill who held a hunger strike to protest the Liberals' failures in Afghanistan. They served and sacrificed for our country, but this NDP Liberal government abandoned their families and other interpreters. They told me they feel ignored by the minister, and he's being insensitive by implying that their families are security threats, even though they were screened to serve alongside our soldiers. Will this minister apologize to the thousands of Afghan interpreters and their families for implying that they are security threats?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, let me state on the record that I have done no such thing. Those who worked alongside the Canadian forces are heroes every bit as much as members of the Canadian Armed Forces who had a presence in Afghanistan. With respect to the specific group, we actually created a stream to resettle the extended families of previously resettled interpreters. Mr. Speaker, last week I was on hand as we welcomed the 10,000th Afghan refugee who's now landed in Canada. We're going to continue to do more. No matter the scale of the challenges, we are going to make good on our commitment to the individuals that we want to bring and reunite with their families here in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Another job well filled. As the minister brags about the low number of interpreters arriving, only about 2,300 Afghan nationals who assisted our Canadian Armed Forces during the Afghan mission have actually arrived in Canada. The Afghan interpreters I spoke to have met with the minister's office 28 times and were told over 1,000 of their family members and fellow interpreters would be in Canada by March 2022. So far, none have arrived. They are tired of this minister's politics. Will this minister do the right thing and apologize to the thousands of Afghan interpreters he has abandoned and admit to his failures?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I find this question ironic coming from a member of the Conservative Party who previously tried to design a program that specifically excluded these same individuals from coming to Canada as refugees. Mr. Speaker, I would remind the member again that if you review his electoral campaign platform, there was no commitment to welcome Afghan refugees to Canada. We will continue to do whatever we can to get as many Afghan refugees here as quickly as possible until we make good on our electoral commitment to welcome 40,000 Afghan refugees to Canada. This is one of the most substantial commitments of any country in the world, and we will not rest until the job is done.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Thank you. I truly want to take the minister at his word. On November 10th, I sent a letter to the Prime Minister pleading on behalf of two of my constituents. Both of them served as interpreters for NATO in Afghanistan. They came to me. They're now in Canada. They're safe, but their families are left behind. They're asking for help. Despite the danger that is upon their family, the letter that I wrote to the Prime Minister was not returned. In fact, 4 months later, all I received was simply that he had forwarded my letter to the ministers. To this day, I have heard nothing. Silence. So I'm asking the minister, I am pleading, I am not playing politics. When do you intend to help these interpreters bring their families to Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I do take the honourable member at her word. But with respect, I'd like to point out that the challenges facing the refugee resettlement in Afghanistan are like nothing we have ever seen. I would remind all members of this House that the Taliban, a listed terrorist entity in Canadian law, has seized control of the territory. Many of the specific individuals that we've made a commitment to are still inside the country. Others who've made it to a third country have challenges beyond the imagination of most people who've never dealt in this sphere that we simply do not see in other refugee resettlement streams. With respect to the specific group that she's speaking to, we launched on December 9th a process to specifically bring the families of previously resettled interpreters here because we believe it's the right thing and we will not rest until we've succeeded in our mission.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, Canadians were clear. They want good jobs, clean air, and a strong economy, a future for their children. Last week, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change released an emissions reduction plan that sets out the next steps to continue to meet these priorities. Can the Minister give us more details about the plan's goals? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for Pontiac for the question. Our plan sets out $9.2 billion in additional funding, as well as an ambitious and realistic sectoral plan for Canada to achieve its 2030 objectives. The plan has been in development for months and is based on comments from over 30,000 Canadians. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that we got broad-based support from different sectors across the country, mayors of Quebec and Montreal, and a number of companies. Our government is here to meet the climate change crisis with ambition, stimulate a clean economy, create jobs, and we are here for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, raising taxes on Canadians should be a test of government confidence. But this Liberal government ignored 800 years of parliamentary tradition by giving itself and future governments an automatic tax increase when it passed the excise escalator on wine, beer, and spirits. Governments should have to ask Parliament every time they raise taxes. Will this government repeal the automatic tax increase and give power to raise taxes back to Parliament where it belongs?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question. And in this particular case, like other taxes and benefits, the alcohol excise duty rate is automatically adjusted every year to inflation, as requested by the industry for predictability and stability. It allows the industry to predict the prices in the future years. And Mr. Speaker, this increase is less than 1/5 of a penny per can of beer, and there are specific measures that we take into account for other alcohol substances. Mr. Speaker, these industries are important for tourism, and the tax that is part of it is important for the Treasury. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Costa Bay Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents and folks throughout Newfoundland and Labrador are dealing with a healthcare disaster. Emergency rooms in remote areas are forced to close. Patients face long wait times just for routine surgeries and procedures. Doctors and healthcare professionals are at an all-time low. 20% of our population is without a family doctor. This is not the Medicare system that Tommy Douglas dreamed of. Will the NDP Liberal minister commit to predictable and stable transfer payments in this Thursday's budget to fix Medicare in Newfoundland and Labrador? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so glad to hear this question because it points to our great collaboration with the government of Newfoundland and the great Minister of Health that we have in Newfoundland. We have worked extremely well together over the last few months. I want to congratulate Newfoundlanders in particular for having some of the highest vaccination rates across Canada for children and for adults, including boosters. They are doing an extremely good job. We're going to keep working with them.
The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, effective April 1st, retroactive salary increases for the National Police Force Collective Agreement kicked in. This will financially affect municipalities across the country. Municipalities in my riding, such as the town of Edson, agree that increases for police officers are necessary, but the retroactive salaries will increase the town of Edson's budget by about $500,000. Mr. Speaker, municipalities like the town of Edson were not part of the negotiations, so why are the NDP Liberals sticking them with the bill?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for the question and for his advocacy on behalf of his community. As he well knows, we have an arrangement through a collective bargaining process which does address a number of issues, including retroactive pay. I want to assure my colleague that we will continue to engage his community so that the RCMP can assure that we are having public safety in his community and right across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Whitby.
Mr. Speaker, the global auto industry is undergoing a seismic shift towards zero-emission vehicles, and Canada can and should be a world leader in this transformation. Canada's automotive sector plays a crucial role in our economy. It supports hundreds of thousands of well-paying jobs, including hundreds in my riding of Whitby and thousands across Durham region. And this industry is driving the development and adoption of clean technologies which will help us rapidly decarbonize on the path to net zero. Yesterday, I was honored to join the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry as he announced a landmark investment in General Motors. Could the Minister update this House on this investment and what it means for building a sustainable economy across Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Whitby for his excellent question and his advocacy for the auto sector, Mr. Speaker. He did a fabulous job yesterday. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we secured a $2 billion investment by GM in their facility in Ingersoll in Oshawa, Mr. Speaker, creating 2,600 new jobs and the very first full-scale commercial EV plant in Canada, Mr. Speaker. It's good news for workers, good news for Ontario, and good news for the Canada auto sector, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 6 years since the start of the debacle at Phoenix, and 1 in 3 public service workers are still having problems getting paid. Workers who've done critical work during COVID and now facing the rising cost of living. Under the Liberals, the use of consultants has increased a staggering 41%. Today, media is reporting that the Liberals are spending even more public money on highly paid consultants to fix the problems created by highly paid consultants. They're paying the wrong people. Will the minister stop throwing money at consultants and properly compensate public service workers for the work that they do?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for that very important question, drawing attention to this issue, which is a priority for our government. Canada's public servants deserve to be paid accurately and on time. We recognize that pay issues are creating stress and hardship for employees and their families, and we are committed to making this right. That is why we are doing all we can to stabilize the Phoenix pay system, which can include outsourcing to help eliminate the backlog faster. We are making progress, but we know that there's more work to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont Petit Patrie. Mr. Speaker, across the country, the housing crisis is hitting people hard, and the Liberals' national housing strategy is flawed. People are living in motels, their car, even on the streets. The Liberals are telling us that they have built more affordable housing units, but their definition of affordable means something more higher or more expensive than the market price. Crazy prices that families simply cannot afford to pay. Will the Liberals include in their budget assistance for people so that they can actually find really affordable housing? The Honourable Minister of Housing. Mr. Speaker, each Canadian deserves safe and affordable housing. Since 2015, we have invested more than $30 billion for affordable housing, and we have introduced the first national housing strategy in Canada. We have a plan that has helped many Canadian families to obtain the housing they need. We know that there is still work to be done. That is why we will move forward.
Now, that's all the time we have for, but I do have one comment for the record, if I can. is that someone's going to ask a question of the member for Timmins James Bay before he bursts. Because I can tell you. All right, that's all the time for this for question period. We have appel au règlement du député de...
Point of order from the member for Shefford. Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. There have been consultations among the parties, and I think that you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that this House designate the first Tuesday of the month of April as being the Invisible Work Day under the United Nations, and ask them to do the same.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. I hear some nays. Let's move on. Orders of the day.
Government orders. Opposition day.
Opposition motion on spending on national defense, standing in the name of Mr. Chong.
And I believe where we left off, the honourable member for Davenport had 3 minutes left. The honourable member for Davenport. And we just want to make sure everybody takes their conversations outside. Again, the honourable member for Davenport.
Okay, hold on. Yes. Mr. Speaker, NATO allies' response to Russia's aggression has also accelerated NATO's transformation as it adjusts to a more dangerous strategic reality, including through the adoption of the next strategic concept at the NATO Leaders Summit in June. Canada is unwavering in its commitment to the NATO alliance, to the defense of the Euro-Atlantic security, and to the rules-based international order. Mr. Speaker, I'd also say that we, as Canada, we understand the